Hey there. This video is coming straight off the cuff because it's a topic that seems to have come up a couple of times in the past few weeks on tarot-related YouTube channels, in addition to being one whose relevance I felt acutely recently when I stumbled upon a tarot spread that bore, to my eye, a striking resemblance to one I'd posted a few weeks beforehand. Same theme, same purpose, a good chunk of the card positions sharing what seemed like extremely similar positional meanings. I have therefore decided it's worth wading into these controversial waters to discuss what strikes me as worthwhile considerations regarding the concept of idea theft among tarot readers. And the most important of these, I think, is this. It is far easier for two people to independently come up with damned near identical ideas than we tend to acknowledge or want to believe. Most of us are biased insofar as we give ourselves considerably more credit for our originality than we rightly deserve, and we readily fall into the trap of behaving as though the ideas that occur to us have emerged from our brains unspoilt by shared culture or context, even when, in truth, we know better. As a result, we as humans are far too quick to see ill intent where there is only synchronicity. In other words, what I want to talk about is just how rarely what appears at first blush to be theft, or something that's too similar to be a coincidence, is decidedly not theft, nor derivative, nor ripped off, directly inspired by, fill in the blank with any other form of mimicry you care to name. And just to be deadly clear, I absolutely do not believe that I have in any way been robbed by some black hat tarot sleuth either. I doubt if the person who posted this so-called similar spread that I'm going to be talking about has ever even watched one of my videos, nor do I doubt for a second that the two of us are merely the most recent in a long line of people who've come up with our own versions of essentially the same idea. If I had never shared my version of this spread with another soul, my fellow YouTuber would no doubt have posted their iteration anyway. There are no villains to speak of in this story, and no losses delivered to either of us as a result of our creative paths intersecting at this point. Nor, by the way, is this my first independent convergence rodeo. Although I don't read tarot professionally, I legally can't, since I'm in the US on an employer-sponsored visa. I work in a field in which intellectual property is perceived as being at least as central and precious to one's career as it is to tarot readers. It's considered by many to be one of the most important metrics of a scientist's professional success, although truthfully I think the importance of many ideas themselves are vastly exaggerated. Nevertheless, it's considered crucial and very important that the seeming originator of an idea is cited when at all possible. When at all possible, which in reality translates to, you cite them when you realize that somebody else has had the same idea and published it before you, which is a far cry from 100% of the time. Spend any amount of time in science and you'll do your fair share of having what seems like a brilliant and novel idea only to later find it's been suggested before many times. And every few months, you'll stumble across a paper that practically lists verbatim suggestions that you yourself made in your own article a year ago, but which, alas, appears to have escaped the author's notice. And I genuinely have no idea how many times I've presented what, to this day, seems to be an original idea or approach but in fact is not. No doubt that somewhere out there's a dude in a basement lab who's still vaguely annoyed that I didn't read the 4 years published paper in which he proposed the same thing. And I doubt if any of this is rare in tarot circles either. If anything, I'd expect that it happens much more frequently, which may sound counterintuitive to some. Science and scientists have a reputation for being light on creativity, although I can't for the life of me imagine why. The endeavor quite literally depends on creative thought and cognitive flexibility. And frankly, given the extreme level of specialization researchers develop, the pool of people who could potentially be inspired by the same constellation of findings and theories as me is a lot smaller on the scientific end than it is on the tarot side. But even when people do their best to acknowledge that an idea of theirs has appeared in print, video, audio, finger painting somewhere else before, there is simply no way they're going to be aware of every instance. Of course they won't. Intellectually, we know this, just as surely as we know that communities that share common philosophies, experiences, and goals are going to arrive at the same conclusions, find inspiration in the same things, and even develop similar styles with a certain amount of regularity. And if you've spent any time teaching others or learning alongside others, you will inevitably find yourself surrounded by people whose approach overlaps substantially with your own because you literally went out of your way to ensure it. Even so, that doesn't mean that we don't emotionally experience these absolutely faultless and innocent events as transgressions. I, for one, choose to blame human perceptual quirks for a good chunk of this. For all that trusting your perceptions is something that a lot of us in the spiritual and craft community are particularly attuned to, and trusting the perceptions of our friends and colleagues is something we are prone to do, it is so important not to rely on those perceptions too much in cases of intellectual creation, especially where the concept of ownership is concerned. Because those perceptions can and absolutely will lie to you. When it comes to things that we think of as possessions, there's a solid argument to be made for our species having evolved to purposefully overestimate what each of us can justly claim as our own. It motivates us to defend even shared resources. And the fact that we do this with mental creations is a predictable byproduct of hierarchical social structures in which esteem is hard-won but readily expanded by such ethereal things as ideas, image, and identity, which has historically translated into more physical resources for the idea generator. And yet, many of us frequently find ourselves in a situation where neither our financial safety nor our resources are actually impacted at all by the seeming misattribution of what we think of as our ideas or creative works to others. Still, from a perceptual standpoint, they might as well be. We certainly act as though it's the same thing a lot of the time. It can feel the same. Maybe because we remain primed to experience a failure of acknowledgement as a loss of actual goods, of things that help us survive. Makes me think of that oft-repeated piece of so-called business wisdom, that not making as much profit as you can is equivalent to actually losing money. Never mind that it's entirely hypothetical money you're mentally piling atop your already healthy margin. The hypothetical second toaster you would have purchased now belongs to somebody else. What was objectively never yours to begin with, you are convinced was lost. Perceptually, there are a couple of tendencies that seem to me to inflate one's conviction that similar ideas, artistic creations, or even scientific theorems that pop up in the public sphere after you've shared your own version of them are derived directly from your work. Post hoc ergo propter hoc, as they say in the Latin. Suppress any urge you may be feeling to be impressed by my mastery of a dead language. I actually learned that phrase from the show The West Wing. It means after this, therefore because of it. And it's just as problematic an assumption when we're talking about creative projects as when we try to draw conclusions about the meaning of the positive correlation between ice cream sales and shark attacks. That which came before cannot be assumed to have a causal relationship with what follows. Just as ice cream sales and shark attacks are both a byproduct of the fact that it's swimsuit season, my tarot layout and your tarot layout are the byproduct of our shared reading lists, lifestyles, and studies. But wait, you say, false equivalency. Ice cream and sharks are nothing alike. But that person's tarot spread is really similar to mine. Sure, you're right, they are similar. But less so than you think because, once again, our perceptions play tricks on us. Once a certain threshold of similarity between two tarot spreads, short stories, flower arrangements, whatever, has been reached, we become more likely to attribute mimicry to every other feature of the independent creation that came second. And we do this even when we'd otherwise agree that those features, when considered in isolation, are far too common or unremarkable to justify any conclusion about them whatsoever. This tendency is how we end up confirming our suspicion of foul play based on aspects of somebody else's work which are also features of 70% or better of every single iteration of that thing ever created. And once again, because we overestimate the originality of the individual components of almost everything we produce, a lot of what we think is unique is part of that common 70%. Which is probably at least partly why an otherwise reasonable person will occasionally think something along the lines of, well, my story was also about an outcast orphaned kid with glasses who has magical powers and gets sent to boarding school where he is then forced to fight an evil magician to death with the help of his best friends. Are you seriously trying to tell me that Ms. Rowling didn't use my stuff as source material? Yes. Yes, I am. Because the potentially mildly ego-bruising truth is that 80% of protagonists in fantasy novels are orphans or become so at some point in the series. 95% of YA protagonists are teenagers, which means that, like most kids, they spend almost all their time at school. And making that a boarding school is a handy means of keeping caretakers distant and out of the way while your characters are adventuring. Otherwise, your best option as an author is to make the hero or heroine's guardians suck at parenting, which is why every YA novel that doesn't take place at a sleepover school, overnight camp, prison colony, or post-apocalyptic wasteland is overwhelmingly peopled by an adult cast of abusers, drug addicts, workaholics, socialites, or plain old idiots you wouldn't trust to babysit your cat for fear they'd accidentally barbecue it. As for the glasses, those are just about the most common shorthand in popular lit for the misunderstood outcast, which still gets trotted out in every book, even though glasses haven't been uncool since the 90s. Note that in the case of female protagonists, this is also frequently achieved by making her too thin, though never because she has an eating disorder. She just can't seem to shake that runaway model physique, gosh darn it. The outcast is, in turn, the single most popular type of protagonist sold to tweens and teens, as well as a good chunk of adults, because nobody wants to read a book about some guy who doesn't have any problems. And the problems kids overwhelmingly face is the feeling that they don't fit in. If by some miracle the hero of your story started out as a popular kid, jock, or cheerleader, they'll be ostracized from the in-group by chapter 3. Fortunately, there'll be an equally unpopular sidekick or a ragtag group of misfits to adopt them and make them look admirable by comparison for the rest of the book. Likewise, approximately 90% of YA novels that involve magic will be about a protagonist who is, surprise, magical. Although at times they'll merely be mind-blowingly attractive to every magical dude or dudette, maybe both, in the universe. As for fighting evil, well, yeah. Again, that's the principal source of conflict for YA fantasy novels. We actually define genres in large part by what the source of conflict is. In romance, the source of conflict is the attempt to form a relationship. In mystery, it's the solving of a mystery. In horror, thrillers, space opera, military sci-fi, action fantasy, epic fantasy, and urban fantasy, it's surviving and defeating evil. And it's even odds that, along with the relationship tension in romance, or the mystery solving in mystery, somebody's gonna try to kill the protagonist anyway. And with that brief diatribe, I'm pretty sure I've just described every YA novel I've ever read. And I've read quite a few. No doubt that of the thousands of professionally published YA books that I haven't read, and the hundreds of thousands that are self-published online, 1,000 are about an orphan with glasses at a boarding school who has magic powers and fights evil magical baddies with his friends. 30 of those stories' protagonists are probably even named Harry. Perhaps you'll disagree, but I'm inclined to believe that there's a hell of a lot more room for unique details, twists, and color in a story arc than there is in your typical tarot spread. Regardless, though, just as with stories, the gist of each card position can be boiled down to a handful of core concepts. What's influencing us? What are we building toward? How can we improve? What should we avoid? Where are we heading? What are our feelings about this thing? What's a secret you can tell me? The wording may change slightly as a result of the overall theme, but the foundations remain more or less the same. Look, it isn't my intention to in any way diminish the act of providing a tarot reading, any more than it's my intention to trivialize the effort that goes into writing a novel. Those are both things I love. They're both things I do. And in both cases, the idea that leads to the experience offered by the tarot reading or the book is a dime a dozen. It's the execution that makes the tarot reading and book great. The tiny hints of spice added to that same old stew that's been baked 100 times before. It's the gestalt. It's the experience. And no matter how great you think the idea you've had is, or how important your tarot-related cash stream is, or how much you attribute the fact that you can make a living reading tarot to the cool concepts you come up with, I sincerely and genuinely think you're overestimating the value of your ideas. And at the same time, massively underestimating just how much the execution of those ideas, the way you read tarot, the way you communicate, the way you make people feel while they're working with you, contributes to your success. Tarot clients aren't ever going to flee a reader because Joe Random over there offers the same spread for half the price, any more than I'm going to forego buying my favorite author's new novel in favor of the free fanfic I can find online. Because nobody's paying you for the idea. They're paying you for the experience they know you personally can deliver. And when others share layouts they've designed for free online, it's the experience we fellow tarot enthusiasts get to then provide ourselves that makes us grateful for it. So yeah, Perhaps it stings a bit when we don't get to enjoy others' thanks, when we provide what seems to our biased brains to be the same idea. But frankly, I think this feeling emerges far more frequently as a result of imagined slights than real ones. That the similarities we see are less significant than they seem. That temporal precedence is an absolutely terrible means of gauging the source of inspiration. And that, in any case, even people who actually do steal another's tarot spread idea are liable to discover that there's no real market for those ideas anyway. That's it. Just some thoughts. For free. But genuinely, I hope we can all continue to make use of and so enjoy fun new tarot spreads wherever we may find them. Take care and have a great night.